My guests, the first will be Professor William Robinson. He is Professor of Sociology and Latin American Studies at the University of California at Santa Barbara. He's also on the university's faculty in its Global and International Studies program. He is a scholar activist, deeply involved in third world struggles for social justice, the Latin American left, popular empowerment of populations, and participatory democracy and government. His areas of focus include globalization, transnationalism, political economies, immigration, and a variety of sociological issues. He received his graduate degrees from the University of Mexico. In the 1980s, he worked as a journalist and activist during the revolution in Nicaragua. He's published 9 books, his latest being Into the Tempest, Essays on the New Global Capitalism, which investigates how global capitalism is now controlled by a multinational capitalist class and is contributing to draconian policies in the U.S. and other developed nations, giving rise to the nationalist police states. His forthcoming book, scheduled for release next year, is The Global Police State. His website is soc.ucsb.edu/faculty/Robinson. He will be for the first part of our program. The second person will be Professor Jeb Sprague. He is a research associate at the University of California at Riverside, specializing in globalization trends, transnationalism, political sociology, and the effects of all this on the Caribbean and Latin American economies. He is the co-founder of the Network for Critical Studies of Global Capitalism, and he's previously taught at the University of Virginia and at the University of California at Santa Barbara. And he is also the author of Globalizing the Caribbean, and earlier Paramilitarism and the Assault on Democracy in Haiti. Nice to have you with us today, Professor William Robinson.
Pleasure to be back on.
With all the media attention on the impeachment hearings, other events around the world are being ignored. Notably, the U.S.-supported coup that has taken place in Bolivia and the ousting of its newly re-elected president, Evo Morales. This was even after Morales agreed to hold elections again after the Organization of American States found election tampering. Oddly, the vote count was halted after electricity, the internet, and phone systems of election headquarters mysteriously went out. The current interim government is extremely far-right, fascistic, and has an agenda against the indigenous population. In fact, the head of their new Senate, the President of the Senate, who was not elected, nor even selected, but simply said that she was now the president. Well, the United States and, unfortunately, Canada and other countries like Brazil have gone along with this and have recognized the new government, even though that this government was, the original government was taken out by a coup. Not only are they right-wing, but we're witnessing in larger Latin America with totalitarian governments taking power and the American media siding more often than not with those who have orchestrated the coup, very much like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton supported the coup in Honduras that they helped with the CIA to orchestrate. The American media has done this repeatedly. They did it with regime change in Libya, in Syria, and there seems to be no recourse for them taking on the world as in this hegemonic way. I'm concerned about it. I know you are as well. The new interim government is led by a fanatical right-wing religious ideologue, and wasted no time to immediately align with those who are representing the wealthy elite. And so this is the hard line. They're extremely racist. They're against all the indigenous populations, of which there are many. And Trump and American politicians, both left and right, are now labeling Morales as a dictator, similar to what was done towards Venezuela's Maduro after he won elections. And the right-wing governments, for example, that of Bolsonaro in Brazil and the other U.S. puppet leaders in Venezuela, have vocally supported the coup. So has the European Union. That should surprise no one, an utterly corrupt organization. So please begin by providing your analysis of the coup, and how do you explain the U.S.'s full support for it despite the accomplishments Morales has made in the country which have not been mentioned at all that I could find in any of the mainstream media, including on the left? Your thoughts, please. The floor is yours.
Sure. Well, this is without a doubt, because there's been some debate whether this is a coup or not a coup, and there's no doubt whatsoever that at this point this is a far right-wing, fascist, as you pointed out, fascist coup, which is backed by the military and the police. And absolutely, this is a time for progressives and leftists all around the world to close ranks in condemning this coup and in showing us solidarity with the struggle against this military and this fascist takeover. But having said that, and by the way, the repression is escalating in the last 48 to 72 hours. There's new massacres and everywhere. I mean, the country is descending into a nightmare. But having said that, I want to put this into a larger context. And the context here is the rise of the left in Latin America in the early 2000s. That included, of course, the Venezuelan revolution, which is still ongoing, that has not been defeated, although it's in serious crisis. It included the election of Evo Morales in 2005, and then he took office in 2006, Rafael Correa, and the turn to the left in Ecuador. Of course, the Workers' Party, which assumed power in elections in 2002 in Brazil. And elsewhere in the region, in Nicaragua and El Salvador, there was a turn to the left throughout the region. And this turn to the left has deeply concerned over the last 20 years the right, the traditional political and economic elite, and, of course, the United States. And there has never been a moment in the past 20 years where the U.S. and the political and economic elites in Latin America have stopped trying to recover the political power, direct political power that they lost. That is, getting rid of these leftist governments in power and having the old oligarchic far-right forces resume state power in these countries. But there's a larger story here. So that's how we have to see this context of Bolivia. The U.S. did not have the ability previously to overthrow Evo Morales. It attempted to do so in 2006, 2007. 2006 to 2009 was a period of tremendous conflict in Bolivia because the right and the far right, the traditional right of the United States, did everything possible to have an early uprising against Evo Morales. That was defeated. And so the U.S. really didn't have a choice but to accommodate itself to the government of the Morales government. But the same thing holds for most of these elected leftist governments in Latin America. We refer to that as the pink tide, the turn to the left over the last 20 years. But the right never lost its wishes and its intent to recover direct political power. It has done so in Brazil with the overthrow. Basically, it was a coup d'etat without the military involvement of Dilma Rousseff in 2013, followed by the rise to power now of the fascist Bolsonaro. That's in Brazil. In Ecuador, there was a change of government through elections, and the new government came under immense pressure from the U.S., from the International Monetary Fund, from the local elite, and turned the country sharply to the right. Venezuela is still facing a total counter-revolutionary siege, and so forth. So what's taking place in Bolivia is the latest iteration, and it's perhaps the most tragic because the repression right now is so serious. There hasn't been a military takeover, for instance, in Brazil or in Ecuador. But having said all of that, I also want to point out that the left in power committed mistakes that undermined a portion of its mass social base of support. The left, this is the elected party left, the institutional left that took over the reins of the state in Bolivia, in Ecuador, in Venezuela, in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, in Brazil, and so forth. And so, while, as I pointed out, this is the hour to close ranks in condemning this coup and in lining up with our total solidarity behind those resisting it. But also, we do need to be clear that the story is a little more complex simply than a coup against perfect leftist government. What the model in Bolivia, and this is very important for us to debate and to analyze, the model in Bolivia, as well as in the other Latin American countries where there have been turns to the left, has been what we call extractivism. And this extractivism, that is that intensifying agribusiness, particularly the export of soy and palm oil on plantations, and also mineral exploitation and oil and natural gas exploitation. The model has been to expand this type of extractivist industries and agriculture, and it has done so in Bolivia, but in alliance with the agribusiness elite in the eastern part of the country of in Bolivia, the Santa Cruz elite, the same elite where Fernando Camacho and this fascist comes from. And so the economic model did not fundamentally threaten in the long run transnational corporate interests or local economic elite interests. In Bolivia, the same thing, not just, I mentioned the agribusiness elite on the Santa Cruz eastern side, Amazonian side of the country, but also gave vast concessions to natural gas and vast concessions, for instance, for lithium that was just about to go into effect, lithium production. And so the economic model meant you tax these activities and you use that to expand social programs. And without a doubt, an unbelievable success, the use of these resources to expand social programs to lift a major portion of the population out of poverty in Bolivia. And of course, we have to acknowledge that there has been a socio-cultural revolution in Bolivia. So the indigenous have awakened, the indigenous pride and the fight against 500 years of racism is absolutely central. But we cannot lose sight also of this critique of the model followed by the left in power. Opened up some space for the right in these countries and the United States to push forward their struggle to recover direct political power and to undermine even the limited social programs that have been in place. So this is definitely a larger discussion. But I'll just conclude by saying that, once again, this is the time, of course, to close ranks against this fascist coup.
Thank you. I appreciate that opening statement. When Evo Morales came to office, Bolivia was Latin America's poorest country. He lost 4 of 6 brothers to malnutrition. Yet his reforms turned Bolivia into the fastest-growing nation, and over half its extreme poverty was gone. There's no other country in the world that can say that it did that in such a short period of time. Our media is completely silent about this, including on the left. And aside from the news about Bolivia's lithium reserves that you just mentioned, it also possesses the continent's second largest natural gas reserves. And besides these resources, there are others that the Western global capitalist class have their sights on in Bolivia. Now, behind all this is what you're familiar with Occam's razor, the philosophical concept, that used the razor to cut away the nonsense and go right to the point. My point is this: how can we reasonably expect the right to do anything, since it's known for decades to be supporting every fascist element around the world and is purely tied into the hegemonic powers of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund? But now we have the left that historically had been the anti-war group that was for civil rights, human rights, and was supporting labor unions and farmers' movements. And yet, just look carefully at the leading spokesperson for the left over the last 30 years, Hillary Clinton, more so than her husband. She was always the brains, and he was the charisma. And look what they did in Bosnia. Look what they did could have stopped, but chose not to stop, in Rwanda. Look what they did in Northern Africa. Also, the 500,000 children died in Iraq. And then she specifically was proud of killing and having Gaddafi died and laughed about it on national television. We came, we saw, he died, and then she cackled. Look at what she did with the overthrow with Nuland, and whose husband's the most powerful neocon in Washington, D.C., in the Ukraine. Look also at the deals the Clinton Foundation made for pay-to-play with getting 20% of Russia's uranium. Now look at what she did in Honduras. Look at the invasion of Libya and Syria. All of that is because of the power base that owns the Clintons. People think the Clintons are where it begins. It does not. They're simply very, very let's say, rewarded spokespersons for the group behind the scenes. So how in the world, when she was supporting Saudi Arabia, and no one, not the New York Times, not the Washington Post, not CNN, nobody sent anyone for the first 2 years into the poorest country in in the Middle East, no one cared about what was going on with the Yemenis, with tens of thousands of children dying. So then going right to the point, if the left is supported by the Democrat corporatists, and they've gone way right, and there's no other moderate voice willing to stand up and call these people out for what they're doing with regime changes and supporting dictatorships, then why should we believe that anything whatsoever is capable of being done by the Washington Consensus?
Right. Well, I will ditto and agree with everything you said except the very first line when you described Hillary Clinton as the left. Not in the least. I think the entire political, official, mainstream political spectrum in the United States starts with the center-right and moves to the far-right. Trump and beyond Trump, a fascist far-right, and the Clinton dynasty, center-right. The Hillary Clinton and the whole crowd are very astute agents of imperialism and of transnational corporate domination around the world. So, I wouldn't characterize it as left, but I agree with everything you are saying, and it's that larger picture in which we need to understand Bolivia. And, I point out also, by the way, that there's all of, 19 now Democratic presidential hopefuls. There's really only one that's come out breaking away from the rest, and that's Bernie Sanders. He's condemned the coup in Bolivia. Elizabeth Warren did too. But he's also condemned the aggression against Venezuela. Yesterday, Elizabeth Warren said that if she were president, she would continue sanctions against Venezuela and that she would recognize Juan Guaido, this total puppet from Venezuela. I'm sure your listeners know who I'm referring to. So really, the entire mainstream political spectrum in both parties in the United States is behind this global capitalist order, except for, I'd make the exception of Bernie Sanders. But I want to also go back to something else you said, Gary. You pointed out these unbelievable social achievements in Bolivia, and that is absolutely right. The only country that did it just as fast as Bolivia, I would say, is Venezuela in the early years of its revolution. But let me also reiterate that as I refer to it, the transnational capitalist class has always wanted in Latin America, as they do in the Middle East and elsewhere, two things. They want direct control over resources around the world so they can exploit labor and exploit these natural resources. Evo Morales in Bolivia said, sure, you can exploit them, but not directly. And you're going to have to pay very high taxes, which we'll use for social programs. But that doesn't satisfy the transnational capitalist class. Secondly, the transnational capitalist class, which I characterize as a global ruling class, wants its direct political agents to be in control of governments, of the state. And Evo Morales was not its direct agent at all. So what you summarized worldwide, and with emphasis on Libya and the Middle East and so forth, is simply what we're seeing in Latin America is the Latin America equivalent of what we've seen elsewhere. But I want to say one other thing as well, and that is worldwide, the system is in crisis. It doesn't look like it's in crisis when they're overthrowing leftist governments like Evo Morales. Absolutely. But nonetheless, the system, and I've been on your program previously and I've commented on this, the system faces a deep structural crisis. It also faces a crisis of legitimacy. People don't see it as legitimate anymore. And it's in that context where we're seeing a resurgence, both of popular resistance from below all over the world. Lebanon, of course, throughout Latin America, Chile, Ecuador just a few weeks ago, Iraq, Iran, and so forth. We're seeing this resurgence of popular resistance from below, but we're also seeing a resurgence of far fascist right. And that's exactly what's taking place in Bolivia at this point. The coup has sparked massive resistance from below. Even people that were not supporting Evo any longer are now fighting against this fascist takeover, but we're also seeing this fascist takeover. So you're seeing this polarization, and it's an absolutely critical moment politically worldwide.
Western economic neoliberalism in Latin America was born in Chile during the Pinochet regime, and when Milton Friedman's Chicago, philosophy, which I'm totally opposed to, it was an experiment, but it was launched there during the Nixon years. Today, the country has one of the largest inequality gaps in Latin America, despite it being the continent's richest nation. Not much unlike the United States. Last month, over 1 million Chileans rose up in nonviolent street protests against Sebastián Piñera's right-wing government, who happens to be a billionaire and one of the richest people in Chile, largely from introducing credit cards into the country. Can you speak, please, about this pattern that seems endemic in Latin America, whereby right-wing neoliberal governments aligned with Washington end up increasing the inequality rates, and also speak about the ongoing tension and adversity that exists between these elite neoliberal governments that are usually governed by corporate interests protecting the wealth and the social and economic stability of the oligarchs, and how that impacts the larger population?
Absolutely. Well, it's you're absolutely right to point to Chile. Chile was the dictatorship that overthrew the democratically elected government of El Salvador Allende in 1973, the Pinochet dictatorship, of course, with the full backing and support of Washington and the Latin American right, and really the worldwide right, was where neoliberalism began. That was the launching of this global neoliberal project. And Chile was the case study. It was held up as the model of the success story of neoliberalism. And, you know, the slogan now in the streets in Chile is neoliberalism was born in Chile, it will die in Chile, because that's what's being challenged in Chile. But after this model consolidated in Chile, it was spread all around the world, and what it involves is precisely, you've touched on a significant portion of it. Neoliberalism involves removing any constraints whatsoever to the complete control of resources and of labor and of public budgets and so forth by capitalists and by their political representatives. It basically frees up capital to do whatever it wants, to grab hold of all resources, to privatize everything, and to dismantle social welfare states. And this neoliberal juggernaut spread around the world in the 1980s and 1990s. After Chile, the front line of global neoliberalism was Latin America. The entire region turned neoliberal in the latter decades of the 20th century, and that resulted in precisely what you pointed out, a dramatic deterioration of the living conditions of the vast majority of the working and the poor people. The richer getting rich, complete social polarization, the dismantling of what little social programs existed throughout Latin America. And this provoked enormous struggles in the 1980s and 1990s and at the turn of the century. And so at the beginning of this, the interview on your program, I was pointing out that the early 21st century was a turn to the left. Well, that turn to the left was in response to this neoliberal nightmare that descended upon the region. And that neoliberal nightmare never left Chile. It was challenged in many of the other countries of Latin America through the turn to the left. But Chile remains a neoliberal nightmare for the vast majority of Chilenas and Chilenos. But what is happening now is, and again, this goes back to what I pointed out, there's a polarization taking place politically worldwide between a resurgent popular resistance, which is now challenging neoliberalism in Chile and elsewhere, and also a neo-fascist political right. And behind the economic project of that neo-fascist political right, such as in Bolivia, is to restore and even deepen neoliberalism, not just restore the neoliberalism that was rolled back in the region in the early 21st century, but actually deepen it with a new round of privatizations, a new round of impoverishments of the poor majority and so forth. And for this reason, given this analysis I'm putting forth, it's no wonder that this Bolivian self-declared government of Áñez has declared that we're going to privatize once again. So part of neoliberalism is all resources, everything. The government itself is turned over to private capitalist interests. So it's no wonder that Áñez comes to power. She unleashes this brutal repression, she and the military and the police and the right wing, against the indigenous and the working majority in Bolivia. But at the same time, they announced they're going to dismantle the whole anti-neoliberal program of Evo Morales. So that's where we're at. And, of course, we have neoliberalism in the United States. And you mentioned Hillary Clinton. I mean, Hillary Clinton is a Democratic neoliberal. Trump is called a nationalist or protectionist, but his actual program is the same thing, neoliberalism. Turn everything over to transnational corporate plunder. Have the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
I appreciate your insights here. In conclusion to this part of our interview, I would add to what you've just said that we see an enormous shift towards the extreme right in Latin America. Besides Morales, who has he was one of the last socialist holdouts on the continent. Ecuador's Moreno has shifted right in opposition to Carrera's socialist reforms. Brazil now has an extreme totalitarian leader in Bolsonaro. Then there is Chile, as you already discussed, and also Argentina, which elected a business mogul. Mm-hmm. All of these new administrations are aligned with the U.S. capitalist globalist efforts. In the broader picture, we're seeing a dramatic shift away from any socialist reforms towards the right and the elite class across Latin America. And the American media is fully captured. The only good thing, and I say the only good thing about Trump's election was that it showed for the first time the full extent of the power of the deep state and its players coming out to challenge him. Had Hillary been elected, nothing would have been in the news about any of these corruptions. I want to thank you very much, William Robinson, for being on. And we're going to take a break and come back with our next guest. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Gary. Thank you.